tossers have thrown it out the door with their behaviour this week. They should be ashamed of themselves. They should absolutely look at themselves in the mirror and wonder what the have they been doing. They're hissing at us and calling us cheats in the Lord's long room, and they have the gall to say, talk to us about the spirit of cricket. Absolute bullshit. There's a big appeal, it's hit him on the pad, he's out! Lions gone, New South Wales are 9 down, onto Sydney Road, and it's hit a car! Oh, I think it's hit a car! What a way to bring up your 50!
All you want is to leave it all behind. Now there is a simple remedy to stay fit for all eternity.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Cricket Unfiltered podcast. I am Manners, and geez, that intro just takes on new meaning when you've got an English guest waiting in the back. Joining me for a special episode is esteemed cricket writer and journalist from the Telegraph Sport, Tim Wigmore. Tim, welcome to Cricket Unfiltered for the first time.
Hi, Manners. Yeah, thanks very much. Excited for my first outing here.
Fantastic. And this is just evidence that I can get still one English cricket journalist to come on the podcast after the last Ashes. So I haven't burnt every bridge yet. Working on it. Maybe by the end, Tim might come back on, but we'll see. So Tim's coming up because he's written a fantastic book called Test Cricket, A History. And, I love a lot of modern history. And Tim, I have to congratulate you. There it is. I have to congratulate you for those watching on YouTube. You just showed a copy. It is just such a beautiful narrative history of Test cricket. And I just felt like I went on this wonderful journey through the history of Test cricket. And obviously a lot I knew, but the way you brought it to life and weaved in the characters and then integrated new countries as they came along, it was just wonderful. And I would recommend anyone that's got a passion for Test cricket, go and read it. I've obviously read other books that have sort of wrapped up Test cricket before, but this was quite a masterpiece.
Yeah, thanks so much. So it was kind of 5 years from the idea to now. So a long process. I think I read over 300 books, talked to over 40 players, some of the best in the world, Sachin Tendulkar, Pat Cummins, Michael Holding, Ian Chappell, Murali, like a whole heap of incredible talent. And I really got a sense actually of how their kind of pride of being part of this story and their sense of a little bit of like their sense of the history in terms of they really feel like they're part of something bigger than their own careers and so on. And I think that is a really important part of the story. In terms of what I wanted to do, I think, as you said, there are lots of great books in Test cricket, but they do tend to be about individual, like a particular country or a series or whatever. It wasn't really something that brought everything all together, which is what I've tried to do. And it's a really a book about stories and great characters, great people, great matches, the turning points. It's sort of meant to be exciting history. It's not a book about the numbers and the stats, although of course there's a sprinkling of those, but it's really about the characters that made the game what it is and taking it on this really kind of remarkable journey.
Oh, absolutely. And you've nailed it. And you bring those stories to life. And you are right that I knew a lot about English history and Australian cricket history and some of the other stuff, but the way you bring the other countries in, the newer Test nations, I found real eye-opening, and learning some of the things I didn't know before. And it was just a brilliant book. So, okay, I want to start at the end. A few things I want to pick up here from the book that jumped out at me. Firstly, at the end of the book, you have a proposal to save Test cricket. Run me through it. Sell it to me. Give me your elevator pitch.
Okay. So in a nutshell, one of the big things I learned in writing this book, people talk about how conservative Test cricket is. I mean, that's kind of a myth, that the game has changed so much over time. I mean, in England, it used to be the norm to have 3-day Test matches, for example. So the game has changed so much over time. We've had new countries, we've had day-night matches, we've had helmets, we've moved from uncovered to covered pitches. The number of balls and over used to be different in different countries, and we've had all these massive shifts. So the idea that you can't change a little bit of Test cricket and it'll ruin the history is just not true at all. We've had so many big changes over.
Can I just give you an example of that? In Australia, we have this thing about the Boxing Day Test and the Sydney Test as being these traditional dates that can't be moved. Well, they've only been traditional for the last 25 years. They're not even fairly old tradition. So you're right, we do get stuck in these things. And as you say, we think, Test cricket has to be 5 days, and it can't be 4 days. So yeah, totally get you on that.
And the reason it's endured actually is it has adapted. It has actually moved. Maybe not as much sometimes, but just more credit for that. So so one of my, I guess if you look at Test cricket compared to other sports, the lack of a structure is an unusual part of Test cricket. I think that has been a problem. The danger now is we're in a position where unless you're Australia, England, or India, and you have those big series, it doesn't really have a great sense of meaning. So for me, the World Test Championship, which obviously you guys are the current proud owners of, and maybe we'll be retaining your crown at Lord's next month. So for me, the World Test Championship should be at the core of plans for to keep the game in good health, because you need every country, not just 3, to have a chance to reach the pinnacle. So at the moment, the World Test Championship is so confusing because you have the table as percentage of points for tests and stuff. So you need to have a standardized system. Isn't
it only Ben Stokes that can't understand it though?
Well, I think there's an element of England making excuses, actually, which is a different matter. That they can say, schedule's unfair. You play lots of matches, you can't reach the final. Well, Australia and India have both reached final. Anyway, so for me, you need to have a really simple, coherent Test Championship. And at the moment, each country plays 6 series, 3 at home, 3 over 2 years. So that's fine. So, but for me, what you need to happen is every game needs to be worth the same number of points. And at the moment, we have a situation where countries, lots of countries lose about $500,000 per test match, basically, unless it involves the Australia, England, or India, which is ridiculous. So we need to get to a point where World Test Championship, I would say, everyone plays 6 series over 2 years. Each series is 3 matches, but 3 matches of 4 days each, because actually three tests of 4 days each is much better than 2 tests of 5 days each, especially with draws coming out the game as it is. And maybe making 90, 94, 96 overs a day is fine. But even with 90, I think you get a lot of results. And then crucially, have every match is there in the series. Everyone's playing the same number of games. Every match is therefore you have the same number of points. So you get 3 points for a win, 1 point for a draw. Let's keep it really, really simple. And then everyone can work out the table. And then you progress to the final stage. And for me, I would have the top team in the winner of the league stage goes straight to the final. And then the second V3, they play off a week before the final in a kind of semi-final qualifier, which actually also gives more context to the final. And you have knockout Test cricket. Knockout Test cricket, we've only had a little bit of it in the Test finals, but it's great as well. So that's what I would do. Gives every country a fair chance to reach the pinnacle of the game, which is how it should be. Means less wealthy countries are playing a bit more Test cricket because you don't have these 5th days, these kind of phantom 5th days that aren't being used. And of course, everyone's going to say, what about the Ashes? Well, for me, it's very, very simple. Is that every series is three matches is part of the World Test Championship, and you're free. And Border Gavaskar or Ashes to just organise extra matches after, but they just don't count part of the table. But they have their own context. That's fine. We don't need to worry about the Ashes. The Ashes is the last thing we need to worry about. The Ashes Border Gavaskar Trophy will always be fine. So we don't need to worry about that. We need to make, when New Zealand plays South Africa or Pakistan, we need to make that series worth more and people get more behind it. And I think by doing that, you can. And as I show in my history, the game has always evolved. So, these traditionalists who in England would say this is outrageous. Well, maybe 100 years ago, they'd have been saying it's outrageous. We might not play Test for the 3 days.
Well, some really good stuff in that pitch. I don't agree with all of it, but I do think you have some merit. Before I get into the details, when you say something like that, that's just pie in the sky stuff. Unfortunately, the way cricket is, it's hard to see anything like that ever getting off the ground because everyone's so self-interested. BCCI run the show the way they want to. I mean, I can't see anything like that ever happening, unfortunately.
I don't necessarily agree because I think the proposal is pragmatic, and it's pragmatic because it still lets the big 3 play more Test cricket than others. So I don't necessarily see it as unviable because actually it's in everyone's interest, even Australia, England, and India, for Test series around the world to be pumped up a bit. And crucially, it's not going to take more time in the schedule. It's just going to be a better use of the existing kind of time given for Test cricket. So I don't think it's unviable. Actually, no, I think it's
okay.
Pragmatic. I think the unviable one is when you say everyone's going to play everyone. Well, that's not going to happen because of India-Pakistan situation and also the schedule. So I think this, we already play 6 series over 2 years each. So I don't think it's an adaptation of that. So I don't think it's unviable. I think it's possible. I think it's the best possible within the existing parameters of where the game's at and who is a power and stuff. I don't think it's unviable. I mean, lots of people thought we'd never even get a Test championship. I know it's so flawed, but at least we have one, which is hopefully a starting block. And the idea was always you'd get this Test championship, and it would be painful to get there, and then it would be flawed, but then you'd actually be able to improve it when you have something to improve rather than just an idea. So I don't think it's impossible.
I like your optimism because I'm pretty bleak about I'm not bleak about the future of cricket, but I'm a realist, and it just seems like I don't know if the big players have come to the table on this. But anyway, details. So I like the 4-day test matches. I've always thought about 4-day test matches in that if it means you can play more test cricket, and if you're a smaller country where, as you say, test cricket is really expensive and it's, 3 4-day test matches or maybe 2 5-day, like you couldn't do 3 5-day ones because it costs, then I think it's a great idea. That wouldn't be mandated though, would it? So if Australia playing England in the Ashes, it'd be 5-day test matches.
Well, no, I think you probably have to have a system where every test is you need to compare apples with apples. And actually,
okay, so this is where I think I get a little bit uncomfortable because I think this is like you want to make cricket like the English Premier League because that's what English people grow up with. Everyone plays each other at the same time, home and away. You get points, and that's just easy way of looking at it. But I don't know. I feel like cricket's more complex than that, and I wouldn't mind, I don't mind a lot of this, but I wouldn't mind the freedom of, say, the Ashes being 5 days and if you can get a result in 4, great, but it doesn't really matter if Afghanistan's playing Ireland in a 4-day game in Dublin and Australia's playing England at the MCG in 5 days. We're still seeing test sides compete, and we're going to know who's the better.
Yeah, to be honest, it's not the end of the world. If you have to have different, some series still go 5 days, but you have, as long as they're in the same structure and the same number of points up for grabs, it's much.
You just want the English Premier League, but on cricket. That's it. I've nailed it. Because I think one of the great things actually about the World Test Championship is it actually makes dead rubbers worth something. So when England comes to Australia, historically they go down 2 or 3-0 really quickly. But last time there was something on the line in those last 2 test matches. Australia, wanted to get the points to get into the World Test Championship final. So there was actually not just the pride of smashing England 4 or 5-0. It's like, actually, we need to win these because we'll get points and we'll get into the final. And it added to it. And even added to this recent series against India where, although the series was alive to the end, there was also all these other contexts above it about who could get into the final. So, yeah, I like a lot of that system. I think I just don't think we're ever going to get a perfect system, unfortunately.
We never get a perfect system, but I think we can get a better one than we have at the moment. And the other thing, having the 3 matches of 4 days each, and what that does, the test series is such a unique part of it. You can have a great fast bowler who's all over an opening batter, and if the batter has to find a response to that or whatever, that is part of what makes it so tough to play, so interesting to watch. So actually when a New Zealand plays South Africa and you get the chance, you see the New Zealand bats having to face Rabada for 3 tests in a row or whatever, that actually also that gives a chance we need more rivalries to develop, right? And you're not going to get a rivalry if you just play 2-match series against each other because it's just so weird. And by having those 3 tests of 4 days each, you get a chance for more rivalries. I think that's what the game desperately needs. And of course, over time, there was a point when Australia-West Indies was the best series in world cricket. Australia-South Africa used to be a blockbuster series. So England-South Africa. So you can have, there's lots of potential rivalries that, actually Pakistan-West Indies in the 80s was the best show in town. So we have had rivalries before, not involving the big 3. They've been really good. And we need to give a chance for more to develop. Otherwise, you get a situation where it's just loads of 2-match series. And then, the last 3-match series involving a team that wasn't in the big 3 was 2019 Pakistan South Africa. That's remarkable. 6 years, and a 2-match series is always going to be such a limiting thing. I think even a 3 to a 2, you can get so much more from it. And I think this is where Test cricket kind of needs to be honest, right? Because there's people who are like, you need to have every game needs to be 5 days, and they say that's the only way others are going to degrade Test cricket or whatever. But by saying that, you actually really damage it because you don't give a chance for maybe longer series, which I think is actually longer series of 4 days far better for me than 2 times 5. And I think we had 2 draws in 50 odd tests last year, and that was just when it chucked it down. So normally, actually, 4 days is now plenty of time to get a result.
Yeah, I agree. And two test series are so hollow. 4-day test matches, you could go Thursday to Sunday, Thursday to Sunday, Thursday to Sunday, the golf.
That's exactly right. And you know, it would be nice if we had matches where more people could watch them, right?
But I still would. If I would be so upset if you said to me the next Ashes is 4-day test, I would be spewing. And if it was your fault, Tim, I would find you, and I would be very upset.
Well, yeah, England will beat you in 4 days anyway.
Yeah, exactly the way baseball's going. Look, great ideas on saving Test cricket. A few other things just at the end of the book before we go back for your little threads. But when you do put a bit in there about baseball, and I sort of mused on that actually if England comes here next summer and wins, then it has all been worth it. But if they come here next summer and they get smashed again, they don't even have to win, but if they compete, if they go home and it's 3-2 Australia and it's been a great series, then baseball's been worth it, and it worked. But I think so much rests on next summer. Can they actually come here and play cricket?
Look, I think the thing we have to remember about baseball is this was a tactic done at a time when England were at a very low ebb. They'd won 1 win out of 17. So by saying baseball's worked, we're not saying England are the best team in the world. We're just saying England were down here and now they're higher up, which I think is a fair comment. But I talked with Pat Cummins and Ravichandran Ashwin about the experience of playing against baseball. That was very interesting in terms of, Ashwin was quite complimentary. He's like, there were times when it worked really well and then settled us, but there were times when he said basically England were ahead and then they made some very, very bad decisions, which is I guess has always been the question about the kind of ruthlessness of it and the time when you need to play a different tempo. But in terms of, it has been a big leap forward in run rates. England have scored at I think about 4.5 and over in the baseball era. Half a run more than anyone else has done over that period in Test history. So it is a revolutionary concept. It's revolutionary in its intent. It's not revolutionary in its outcome. And this is the difference with the Steve Waugh, Adam Gilchrist Australia side. And that was, they were bringing the game forward in terms of run rates. They were also bringing the game forward by winning so much. England have done the first, haven't done the second.
Yes, but do you sort of get where I'm saying that I think so baseball I think will be judged then by how they go next summer, because if they come to Australia and get smashed again 4 or 5-0, it's going to be like, it's the same old England team.
Yeah, no, that's right. That's undeniable. But I think there is a weird thing. I think England people kind of obsess about the Ashes more than Australians do. I know you guys think about it a lot as well, but I think when England are playing other series, it's always seen through the prism of the Ashes. When Australia played India last summer, that was just a great series. Australia were desperate to win. There wasn't like, what does this mean for the Ashes, that kind of thing. And that's a weakness for England. And that's why we see England now, kind of pretend the World Test, or kind of say they don't really care about the World Test Championship, which is very odd when, Australia really care about it, actually. India certainly really care about it. And so it's not just like other countries who have great fixtures and these great series. They are putting it on a pedestal. And that's
what's great about the World Test Championship is before it, how we knew who the best Test side was is, a lot of domination, but also, going away and beating the, who was considered the other best Test side, beating them at home. And, you win away, then you're considered the best. But now the World Test Championship, we get, the 2 best sides get a one-off game and let's see who is the best. So I think it really works. About the Ashes, an interesting point you made about the Border Gavaskar Trophy, and this is an interesting phenomenon. And probably if you write a book in 10 years, I think this would be a big topic. But the way India has spread around the world and taking cricket, before last summer, people would ask me, "Is the Border Gavaskar Trophy as big as the Ashes?" And I would have said no. It's big, the Border Gavaskar, but no, the Ashes just grabs everybody, and it's just a cultural phenomenon. But last summer, with the Border Gavaskar Trophy, every metric was record-breaking. Views, clicks, ratings,
Crowds.
engagement. I mean, you saw the crowds at that 5-day test in Melbourne. That's phenomenal. They got hundreds of thousands of people to a test match. And so there is now a genuine shift, I think, because there's not much now between the Ashes and the Border Gavaskar, and I wonder how that translates to England v India, which you've got this summer.
Yeah, I think England-India is very big. I think it's come to be the second biggest series for England, but I don't think it's. I actually think Border Gavaskar is just a little bit on a slightly higher level than England-India, and maybe just those series have been better. I mean, that's been it since Kokosra 01, which I talk about in the book as one of the really defining test matches that does change things. When India had that incredible win, it's been such a good rivalry. It's been the best rivalry in world cricket. I think India have also won more than Australia have in that period as well.
Yes.
So it's been superb, and actually Australia have gone to India and they generally lost, but they've thrown some punches and stuff. So and the series in Australia have been really outstanding. I just don't think England-India is quite there, but the fact that England-India now is a 5-test series suggests we're getting there. But yeah, it goes back to that this is a lingering thing. I mean, England used to do a thing where they would, like 1930s, they would go to West Indies and they'd take a kind of weakened team on purpose, and they'd almost have an excuse before they left of why they were going to lose. And England had a thing where it didn't really count that they would lose tests unless it was at home, unless it was the Ashes. So it's only actually when England lose to West Indies in 1950 at home that they're like, oh, wow, we have lost and these guys are good, rather than just saying, oh, we've sent our B team and we've lost. So there's a kind of element of England were kind of making excuses before the games even started, which was kind of amusing.
Yeah, it is amusing. And just that, so that shift in front of us, as I said, I'm interested in 10 years when you write a book, how the proliferation of Indian people across the world is taking the game, and specifically Test cricket. All right, first quick break for those listening on the podcast, and then we'll be back to take a bit of a trip down memory lane. You are listening to the Cricket Unfiltered podcast. I am Menas. I'm with Tim Wigmore, who's just written a great book on Test cricket, a history. It's called Test Cricket, a History. And so before the break, we're examining some of the more modern notions of Badsball and your crazy idea to turn Test cricket into the English Premier League. But, when I read your book, there was things that stood out to me. So firstly was how fleeting the West Indies era was. When you actually step back and look at the sort of context of Test cricket, they had that early period and then leading into the Thai Test, and then they slowly built up to this crescendo where they were the dominant team for so long, but then they just fell away so dramatically. And you just look at that sort of era of West Indies cricket and wonder if it'll ever be repeated in any, it'll never be repeated, but even if they'll just show even shades of it. Yeah.
So I think West Indies, in the 50s and 60s are actually a very, very solid, very, very good team. They win in England. They had the amazing series in 1960-61 with Frank Royal and Richie Beno as captains, and the Thai Test. And that's 2-1 to Australia. I think with neutral umpires, it might well have been 2-1 the other way. And then West Indies beat Australia in the Caribbean as well. So that they're a really good, a really very good side then, possibly the number one for a little brief period in the early 60s. They then dip a little bit, and then it's from 1976. So after they're hammed in Australia, and then when India chased down 400 in Trinidad, and Clive Lloyd's had enough of bowling spin, basically. And after that, we get an amazing era of West Indies cricket. They unbeaten from 1980 to 95, and a really incredible force. And one of the things, I've talked to a lot of those great West Indies players, Michael Holding, Andy Roberts, Curtly Amrose, and Barrett, Joel Garner. So I've talked to a lot of them about what went into that era and that team. And one of the really interesting things is that West Indies really improved when they improved their talent pool. So there is basically a big four, as they call it, big four islands in the Caribbean in cricket terms, which is Barbados, Guyana, Trinidad, Jamaica. So those four. And until 1973, every single West Indies player has been from these four. And And what happens is, from the 70s, West Indies actually start to basically look elsewhere for their talent pool. So they actually start to pick more on merit. I talked with Andy Roberts, one of the great Test bowlers. He's from Antigua, and he's the first Test cricketer from Antigua. But he said there were several Antiguan players before him who he generally said were better than him, even better than him, and they were not picked. So West Indies actually, they rise because they start to pick more on merit. And of course, that's also seen with captaincy. So until 1960, there's never been a black captain with tenure. So George Headley does the game on a one-off basis in 1948, standing as captain. But so West Indies are picking these white captains, and they're also picking a lot of white players. Some of whom are worth their place in the side, but several of whom are not. So until Moore becomes captain, of players in the top six for West Indies, the white players are batting the top six. So picked as batters, they have an average of 28. Everyone else who bats in top six for West Indies has an average of 43. So actually, by picking so many white players, they're reducing the strength of their side. So all these factors kind of come together. They benefit from World Series cricket, which is players identify as really pivotal in terms of making them more professional and making them fitter, and kind of getting to think of themselves as full-time cricketers and stuff. That's really important. There's also a huge influx in county cricket and even league cricket in England. So West Indies by the late 70s, early 80s, they're probably more professional than cricketers from any other country in terms of the amount they're playing, the way they're thinking about cricket.
Because I played cricket in Essex in the mid-90s, and there were, and this is at a low level, and there were a lot of West Indians in the first teams.
Absolutely, yeah. And that becomes, that is such a ticket to go to league cricket in England. So often you get players. You have, Garfield Sobers and Wes Hall, some of the greatest players ever. Viv Richards, plays in Lancashire League as well. It's incredible. You get these guys play in league cricket in England who are then international superstars. But of course, there's league cricket in England at the time. There's quite a lot of pressure because you're an overseas player. So you're the only guy in the team who's paid. And you are under pressure to deliver. And you have these... Of course. These matches which basically become, who has kind of a duel between the two West Indies players and one on each side and stuff. In county cricket, you have all these great fast bowlers playing against each other. So I think these things all come together. They have Dennis Waite, who's a Australian, who is their fitness trainer, and they really, Michael Holding and a few others really emphasise how important he was, because the bowlers, if you look at the bowlers, actually, it's amazing how rarely they get injured. So they really have complete. They know what they need to do. And also, I talked to them, they were quite honest, if the county cricket, which is a 8 days a week job, they were bowling within themselves, and it was all designed that when they played, still doing enough. And then when it was test cricket, they could really put their foot on the gas.
Amazing. Any of the other countries that you particularly enjoyed researching about their entry into Test cricket? You talk about the recent entries of Ireland and Afghanistan, but you document all the countries as they come into Test cricket. Was there any particular story that struck a chord with you?
I think when you take a step back and you zoom out, it is incredible how bad India were for so long. So until the 2000s, in every single decade, they are.
I'll have to edit this out, by the way. I'm just not going to deal with the hate mail.
Oh, I thought you were sharing it on social just to with my name in. Yeah, your funeral. Yeah.
Tim Wigmore said this, not me. I swear to God, it was Tim. I swear to God. Go on, sorry.
It's incredible how bad India for so long. So until the 2000s, they lose more tests than they win in every decade. And the reasons for that really is, in a nutshell, a lack of fast bowlers, which is also linked to where India get their players from. They rely really on 5 cities or so, and it's kind of middle upper class players from the city. So they're not getting remotely all the talent in the country. There's also a lack of money in the game, which means lots of players have to actually can't afford to play cricket and have to retire early, either from India or from Ranji Trophy. So that stand is kind of hollowed out. And one of the great nuggets I found from the book was India beat New Zealand in a test in the 1960s. And at the time, quite a rare win for India. And their reward is to be docked a fifth of their match fee. And the reason is because they beat New Zealand in 4 days. And the Indian board at the time is so penny pinching that they say, well, the payment is per rata. So you only get
pay per day.
Yeah, you only get 4 days
Mhm.
worth. So they'd have been better off losing in 5 days than winning in 4.
They're like freelancers. They should become a cricket journalist. So we spoke about it before, but one thing I loved about the book was the way you integrate the characters and the great characters that make up Test cricket. You know, all the early characters, and W.G. Grace, Bradman, Viv Richards, Shane Warne, Steve Smith. I mean, all of them. And you said you talked to a lot of cricketers. Are there any in particular that you enjoyed researching, mate? Any that really, once you got in and learnt more, you were captivated?
Well, I was very lucky to do so many great interviews. I mean, I was kind of blown away, really. I mean, interviewing Sachin Tendulkar obviously was absolutely incredible. And one of the things talking to him was because he was such a great player in the 90s, probably actually his peak. But as you said, India was such a bad side then, often away from home. So Tendulkar only wins one of his first 44 test matches away from home, which is remarkable. And there was this, this story. So in Barbados in 1997, India in the fourth innings need 120 to beat West Indies, and they're like 2 for none overnight. And Tendulkar goes to a restaurant on the cliffs in Barbados, and he goes to the waiter and asks for a bottle of champagne, and he's asked him to chill it and says he'll be back tomorrow to drink it. But then the next day, India collapsed against the great West Indies fast bowlers to 81 all out. Tendulkar gets out for 4, and he's basically traumatized. He doesn't leave his hotel room for 2 days. That was a kind of amazing story. And again, what that shows also is how much it means, and also that again the history, because beating West Indies away was such a big deal. That probably added to the sort of tension for India and the stakes. And it shows that and in the great test matches is often you're not just going up against your opponents, but you're going up against kind of the weight of history as well. Actually, even when West Indies won at the Gabba last year, that was such an amazing moment, because obviously West Indies against Australia had been really struggling for the whole century so far, and of course it links that game. It went back to the great tie test in 1960, and that's actually kind of the magic of Test cricket, when you have these weird parallels, and it's actually the history, the sense of other great teams have failed or whatever doing the same thing. We've succeeded, and that makes the achievement all the greater, and that really resonates, I think.
Yeah, I loved, one thing I loved about the book was just reliving some of the memories I have from watching so much cricket and seeing so many of the moments you write about on TV or live. But I also, found it quite difficult at some stage, because so as I'm reading it, I'm thinking, geez, this English author is reveling in Australian losses. Adelaide in 1992-93, particularly heartbreaking for me as a teenager. Obviously, Eden Gardens 2001, Headingley 2019, the Gabba 2024, all these, but there's more. You don't miss an Aussie loss. Like, you're very thorough in that. And so I'm thinking, okay, this is an English lens. But when I put my sensible hat on, what it made me realize, and the way it's well written, and I'm obviously being facetious, but that Australia is such a powerhouse in cricket, different to England, and I'd like to say like the Brazil of cricket for those that love football, but I think it's different to that. And so when we lose, it is noteworthy. When Australia loses to somebody in dramatic fashion or in a close game, it is noteworthy, and people do look and go, "Oh, geez, the Aussies got beaten," and that the book reflects that.
Yeah, I mean, so they say the definition of news is stuff that's surprising, right? And Australia winning is very surprising. And I think I show over history. Actually, it always surprised me actually how much better we know. Like, it's not news that Australia are very good, but how much better Australia have been than the rest. The extent of that did surprise me. So basically, over Test history, Australia win 17.5 tests for every 10 they lose, and the next best record is 12.5. So Australia are kind of 50% better than the next. That's a huge difference. So over time, I mean, it's a bit like when people say there's a bad All Blacks team. It's like there's not really a bad All Blacks team, and there's not really a bad Australian team. I think with the exception of the period in the 80s, after we have the all those retirements of Lily and Marsh. But with the exception of that, there's not really a bad Australian side. And that is actually why beating Australia consistent, often is such a landmark moment, because it's Australia are pretty much always the litmus test. Australia are not always the best team in the world, but generally, if you can beat Australia, you probably are the best team in the world. So Australia generally a top 2 or 3, really, apart from the 80s, without fail in Test cricket. And it's just funny actually looking. So people talk about the 1950s as a golden era for English Test cricket, and it kind of was in many ways, but it's still bookended by getting hammered in Australia in the Ashes, both 51 and 59. And Australia still have the best, win percentage of the decade of any country. So even in what we think of as a very good era for English cricket, Australia was still a little bit better. So that's a reoccurring thing. And I talked with Ian Chappell and Justin Lang. I tried to kind of examine, this is not just about players. What is it over time about the kind of Australian cricket culture that makes it consistently the best? And a few things kind of stood out. I think the club system is really, really important in Australia. And the fact that you have, you still, before the start of every season, you still would have great test players who then step back and play, a round or two for their clubs. And you have this link, I think, between the club game and the test team, which is really important. You also have the standard of club cricket is because it's such a pyramid, which I think is really important. In England, a lot of club cricket is basically sort of social cricket. So you don't get that kind of ruthlessness, and you don't get a sense of, what I do here will translate into me getting picked for a higher standard. A lot of English players are very honest. They say that club cricket in Australia is a higher standard than county second 11 in England. So that's a huge part of the story. I think clearly, very simple point, but right, the climate is a huge factor. All these jokes about English weather, but you can, Australia, you can be playing cricket, 9-10 months a year, if not 12 in many parts, and that really does matter. And obviously the outdoors lifestyle and stuff. And I think cricket.
That's why you didn't win a point in the recent women's Ashes, because of the weather.
Oh yeah, the John Lewis. I don't want to sound like John Lewis. No one wants to do that. Yeah, and I suppose the broader kind of role of cricket in the kind of national story. Cricket is the national sport. Obviously, I know Aussie rules is bigger in Melbourne and stuff, but in terms of as a national team,
absolutely,
the Australian Test team is the national team, and I think that is so important. And you get the kind of mythology over time develops, and I think even the kind of reverence that Australians have still for people like Bradman and Victor Trumper and stuff. It's all the sense of being part of a story, and that's, I think, a little bit different to what a bit more than what you have in England. I also think over time, we talked earlier about selection. So one of the big problems for English cricket is over time they have the kind of class obsession in England. So England used to have a thing where they had this divide between professionals and amateurs. So professionals was a normal guy who was paid to play cricket. And
so the SCG dressing room is still divided in the visitors section into amateur and professional. Have you been in there in the England dressing room at the SCG? It's still, there's a section at the front and a section at the back. One's for amateurs, one's for professionals.
I did not know that. That's fascinating. But yeah, so you have amateurs are these unpaid people, or they often get expenses which are worth more than their salary. So it's a bit of a con. But this historically, until the 60s, at England, in county cricket in England, and amateur captains until the 50s. So what I looked at is often how often these England captains were just not at their place in the side. So the first 10 Ashes tours that the MCC run from 1903 to 1951, the average, so in those 50 matches, the average of the England captains was 22 with the bat. So you're starting from a position where your captain is not worth their place in the side. And I think in general, Australia are much better at picking their actual best 11 players to be in their team and not worrying about class and everything else. And that obviously helps as well, especially when you've got all those other advantages.
Yeah, I mean, I loved the trip down memory lane with this book, and the way you highlighted Bradman, how much better he is than everybody, and just the way you brought to life that period of amateurs and professionals. It was a real eye-opener for me. And so a couple of things I also liked was when you took a step back and you sort of, I know in another book you've done a lot of analysis on cricket and facts and figures and all the trends, and so this is an area you've done before, but you mentioned it before, but the way you talked about the effect of home umpires and then bringing DRS, what that did.
Can I come back for 30 seconds at the door? Sorry.
Go for it. No, go for it. Amazon, hello. I wonder what Tim's getting delivered. I'm going to just keep talking because I'm not going to edit this YouTube video. So I hope you're enjoying this interview, Tim. Lots more to come. I want to touch on the attack in Pakistan. I also want to talk about the South African team. And then I'll probably let him go because I'm taking way too much of Tim's time. But He's really got such an abundance of knowledge about world cricket. It's incredible, and he wants to talk about it. So that's fantastic. And he took all my jokes at the beginning well. So an Englishman with a sense of humour. We've found one. There he is, folks. There he is. That's not true. You have to have a sense of humour if you live in England. Welcome back. I was just filling airtime.
Oh, I'm worried all the things you would have said about me, but anyway.
No, they're all nice. Don't worry. So yes, just that. You talk about the effective home umpires, which is really the stats you bring up are really compelling, and then into the DRS era and the unintended consequences of that. I love that sort of step back and big picture look at the game.
Yeah, thanks so much. So I mean, it's kind of incredible looking back now that until 92, we didn't have neutral umpires really in Test cricket. In fact, until 2002, we still had one home umpire per in each game, which seems crazy. So it's really interesting to look at the effects over time. There's all these stories of. I talked with Michael Holding actually, and there was a game against Australia where with Jeff Lawson twice trodden on his wicket. And in both cases, the umpire said it was the wind that knocked off the bails, and he got off, which is kind of unbelievable. I talked with Jeff about it as well, and he was.
There were so many stories. Gavaskar storming off the MCG when he wasn't happy with the Australian home umpiring.
That's right. So, anyways, I was trying, as you said, take a step back and look at the effects. So you see, you can basically see in each country the kind of LBWs for one country versus the other. So Sri Lanka is actually the country which has the biggest difference. So basically, in Sri Lanka, I wouldn't say that, but there seemed to be a better...
there's been a lot of curious evidence in the last few years. Anyway, continue.
And it can't be done for libel here.
Well, you can't be done for libel because we haven't actually named anybody. So
no. So that does see, yeah. So I think a lot of it is sort of pressure from the crowd, from local crowds and authorities, and probably a little bit of like, if you think about the conflict of interest, is like, well, the border deciding whether you're going to umpire in the next match. So you probably want to please them, and if you can please them by giving them the odd LBW and not giving them against your star batter, right? And also there's a weird kind of social thing where captains, when they're batting, historically are at LBW less. So it's like if you're captain, you're less likely to be at LBW. But that then when DRS comes in, so that changes. So captain's just like a normal player; they get out LBW as much as everybody else. And there's also this very strange thing with LBW.
Don't the captains, they used to write a report about the umpires? I mean, they do in state cricket here. I'm sure that would have been the same in Test cricket. So if you're the umpire, you don't want to give the guy who's writing a report about you out.
No, you don't. There's all these conflicts of interest, which are very, very, which is the way, because cricket's kind of not really been run properly, I would say, probably ever. But
I'd agree.
Often run even worse than it's being run now in terms of from this point of view. So you have a very strange situation where kind of who is marking the teachers and stuff. So it's all very odd. And you have certain countries. I mean, when Javed Miandad goes to India, for example, he says, I'm going to practice without wearing pads because in the nets, because he's basically saying if it's hitting his pad, he's a goner. And the one
thing you bring up in the book is, and it was an old adage when I was growing up, get on the front foot if you're facing a spinner and you won't be given out LBW. No matter if the ball runs along the ground, hits you on the ankle and is going to hit middle stump. If you're on the front foot, most umpires just go, yeah, not out. Could be doing something.
Exactly. So what changes after here, one of the big shifts, as well as we get a kind of end of this country bias, you also have LBWs change. But it's in a funny, strange way. So you get spinners now get way more LBWs, and it's exactly for the reason you said. Is that historically you shuffle forward. Often in some cases, you just pretend you're playing a shot. You don't really play a shot. You keep your back kind of hidden behind that front pad. And you take a strike forward. And if it's literally knocking out middle because it's not really bouncing, you're going to be safe. So that changes with DRS. But with fast bowlers, really the opposite happens. So fast bowlers actually get fewer LBWs now than they did before. And basically what umpires say is the stumps, compared to what umpires used to think, are actually both wider and a bit shorter than they thought. So what that means is for a spinner now, if you bowl straight, you're going to be getting those LBWs before. If you're hitting middle and off, you weren't. But for a fast bowler, sometimes those balls, when you hit the guy's playing a backward defensive and it's hitting him kind of on the top of the knee, right in front of middle. Actually, historically, you'd not always have got those out because the batter was playing. Sorry, historically, you'd have generally got those out because the batter was back and the umpire would think it was. But actually, now we know that ball was often going over, and actually, you don't even need DRS itself to have these effects. All that really, the change in a sense is not just DRS; it's actually just the replays on screen and the kind of the ball tracking that we now see. Because even if umpires are in a match which doesn't have DRS. Umpires, I talked with Simon Talfall, the great Australian umpire, and he basically says, well, when you can see the replay and you know how the ball typically behaves, that just impacts how you umpire. So it makes a huge bearing in terms of the umpiring. But there's a weird thing, actually, that even though this happens, home advantage remains and even increases in some cases. And I think what happens is maybe teams are getting more... Well, you have tours are a lot shorter nowadays. I think the lack of kind of warm-up games does hurt away teams. And I also think maybe home teams have become a bit more kind of ruthless in exploiting their home advantage and things like that. So you have these different dynamics in working in different ways. But yeah, overall, spinners are big winners of DRS and batters when they go away from home probably feel they're treated more fairly nowadays.
Yeah, you really point out how some touring teams did have, they did have merit feeling aggrieved with some of the decisions and stuff.
Just on that, yeah. So when Pakistan go to Sri Lanka in 1986, it's during the civil war in Sri Lanka, and basically seemed like the Sri Lankan government put pressure on the board and the umpires to help Sri Lanka in that series. And Imran Khan later says, it was completely kind of rigged, and in that series Pakistan lose 14 wickets LBW, Sri Lanka lose only 2 LBW. So I think it's reasonable to say something a little bit strange is happening.
Another thing that jumped out to me as I went through this journey of Test cricket, the highs and lows, the horror of what happened to the Sri Lankan team when their bus was attacked in Pakistan in 2009. Now, I'm lucky enough to have Kumar Sangakkara on the podcast and spoken to him about it, and it just jumped out at me when at the length and the breadth of Test cricket, that might be the single most horrific moment in the history of Test cricket.
Yeah, I mean, you actually have a team being attacked. I think that's completely right. I talked with Hajar Warner about it as well, but it's obviously just an unbelievably tragic, terrible thing. And I guess a reoccurring theme though is this strange game, Test cricket. It's not isolated. It's never isolated from politics and the world around it. We see that with a class in England, with the captain situation in West Indies. We see it with apartheid, of course. Basil Oliveira plays, one of the most important innings of all time. Is 158 in an Ashes match in 1968, which helps to lead to England not touring South Africa. So like these huge moments. And obviously the Sri Lanka team being attacked. Yeah, that showed it in another graphic and horrendous way as well. And it obviously leads to Pakistan's exile from Test cricket. So Pakistan are the first team who, for a prolonged period, are unable to play at home. So I think Azhar Ali I interviewed, and he has to wait until his 75th Test to play a Test away from home. You have like Syed Ajmal, some great careers, and they never play at home. So it's incredibly sad on so many different levels.
Oh yeah, incredibly sad. And as I said, just the single most horrific moment in Test cricket history that I can that jumped out from your book, and also that Test cricket's been lucky; it hasn't had many really awful things happen. I mean, you think about football's history with the fire, I can't remember, and Hillsborough, and all these tragedies in other sports, but in Test cricket in particular, it has led a kind of charmed life.
Yeah, that's a really nice way of putting it. I think one reason for that would be the nature of the game. It kind of, I think people who go to the cricket, they're a little bit less partisan in general than people who go to a Premier League football or to probably AFL as well. Just the nature of it, and you get the lovely thing. You've never had home and away ends in Test cricket. You just kind of go, and there's a charm that you sit with, and you get mates with people from who are supporting the other country, and you have a bit of banter with them.
The drunk English fans abuse you. Go on, sorry.
Yeah, you can do without the bar. No, but yeah, you have that, and so you do have a kind of affinity between fans, and which is part of the charm. I mean, one of the great stories, which is kind of even more poignant now, is that in 1999, one of the great Test matches of all time, so Pakistan v India in Chennai, when Sachin Tendulkar makes an incredible 136 in the fourth innings, but India collapse at the end. They lose by 12 runs, and Pakistan do a lap of honor around the ground, and they're applauded by the whole ground in Chennai, and that's such an amazing moment. And I've been to the ground, and there is a plaque outside. There's a plaque there which commemorates that moment, and really does show the capacity of Test cricket really to bring people together from different countries, and a sort of sense of a shared experience, which is really, really special. Of course, there's also limits to what Test cricket can do. It's not going to heal the world, but I think there are times when it can improve things.
Yeah, it's not actually going to settle the border dispute in Kashmir, but the other thing, well, speaking of that, what really jumped out to me was Virat Kohli retired last week, and he never played a Test against Pakistan.
Yeah, and that's so true. And yeah, so the last Test was 2007 between India and Pakistan, and who knows when the next one will be again. But in terms of we did talk about the kind of political impact in cricket, and one of the just negative impacts, actually, I think politics has helped to ruin, even when it has happened, India-Pakistan as a game, because there's been such a, when you talk to players involved, there's been such a fear of losing. So I think 64% of Tests between India and Pakistan in history have been draws, and you have again and again in the 80s, you just have these 0-0 series because people are petrified to show any aggression in case it goes wrong, and people are more worried about losing than they are of winning. And you have, historically, basically the easiest way to get sacked as Pakistan captain is if you lose a series against India. So again, that kind of lends itself to this negative cricket. So it's been odd, actually, because we've got India Pakistan the kind of right when it has been happening. This great rivalry. I think it's been a much greater rivalry in white ball cricket, where obviously someone has to win and lose, than it has been in Test cricket.
It's a great documentary on Netflix about the India v Pakistan rivalry that a friend of mine worked on. So if listeners, if you haven't seen it, I'm sure you've seen it.
Yeah, I've seen it. That's excellent. Yeah.
All right, last little thread I want to pull on before I let you go, Tim. I love great batters. I absolutely love great batters. So when I started this podcast, it was 2013, so a long 12 years ago, and it was just before the Oval Test. And the next Test, Steve Smith scored.
Yeah.
And so I've been fortunate enough, for the 12 years of this podcast to really follow him. And even going back to my youth, I was at the SCG when Lara scored 277. I was at a year before, I was at the SCG when Tendulkar made 100 in Warne's debut. And so I've always been fascinated with these great batters. And Lara, Tendulkar, you bring them to life so well. But Smith's story is not yet finished. But I do love how you highlight that 5-year period from sort of 2014 to the end of 2019, where you say he's the next best Test batter to Bradman. What do you think is at stake now for the rest of Smith's career?
Yeah, so as you said, for the book, I was so lucky to talk to a heap of great batters. I talked with Tendulkar, talked with Lara, talked with Dravid, with Peterson, Lang, like a huge array. Ian Chappell, of course, has the experience of playing with and without helmets.
I'll tell you a yarn quickly. So the night Lara scores 277, I was lucky enough to meet him. I was at a function with the West Indies. So I actually met Gary Sobers, and I was talking to Gary Sobers, and he was actually trying to hit on to this family friend I was with, this pretty woman. So I was getting a lot of attention from Gary, and anybody that know him will know that that's not out of character. So I'm meeting Gary Sobers, and then he takes me over to meet Brian Lara, and he introduced me Lara, and he says to Lara after he scored 277, he says, 50 is nothing for you. You've got to think of 50 as just a start. 100's 50 for you, and you need big scores. And after that, Lara was the king of the big score. He broke the Test record twice, the highest first-class score. And it was interesting that Sobers was saying to him, who himself had been the record holder, passing on that tradition to a fellow countryman and saying, hey, hold your horses. 100's nothing for you. Make big scores. And I was lucky enough to hear that, and I left a big impression. So anyway, so so you got to talk to Lara and Tendulkar and all these great players.
Yeah, I mean, Lara's actually, we talked about Australian defeats, so just to bring in one more.
Come on, I left that one out on purpose.
Yeah, Barbados in '99 when West Indies need 308 to win in the fourth innings against McGrath, Warren, McGill, Gillespie, a great attack, and Lara kind of taught me through that innings. He's basically amazing kind of start of it. He came out on the fourth evening and had a night watchman before him who was then dismissed quickly, and he comes out and he's booed incredibly, like, you're booing Brian Lara, why would you do that? And then he kind of can't sleep the next day, and he calls his friend who comes at 5 a.m. from a nightclub in Barbados, and they watch footage of some of his great knocks before, including that 277 in Sydney you talked about, and he basically visualizes the innings and how he's going to play it the next day, which involves really he's basically saying he's going to really attack the spinners because Australia only have two specialist fast bowlers, and he wants the fast bowlers to have to kind of come back before they're fully rested to make them less effective. And he basically plays the innings in his head before he plays it. In reality, 1 for 3 not out, won by 1 wicket, getting half the runs.
Yeah, I watched it. It was awful, awful,
unbelievable. And yeah, getting a sense of how you craft innings. That's just so special. And to go back to sort of Steve Smith. So yeah. So Steve Smith has the second best Bradman career, and by that I mean over Bradman's career, that number of tests, Smith has the second highest average. So we shouldn't forget just an unbelievable player he's been, and potentially we're now seeing him a kind of a second wind. He's had a great recent run again, having had a fallow by his standards for 4 or 5 years. Not terrible 4 or 5 years, but relatively kind of normal rather than Steve Smith 5 years. And
one of my great heartbreaks is the combination of the Sandpaper Gate ban and COVID-19 meant I think we lost a lot of Steve Smith's best years at Test level.
Yeah, I think that's true. Although the Sandpaper, I think I would caveat. I wonder if his incredible series in England in 2019, so he gets 770 runs in 7 innings. I think part of that is probably he is a kind of repayment for when he's been gone, and it probably, I think, because of the intensity with which he's played, probably having a break for him was maybe not the worst thing in terms of, actually Shane Warne for very different reasons, of course. He has a year-long break from Test cricket, and he comes back. And actually, I've interviewed Shane's brother, and Jason, he told me that he told Shane at the time, actually, you'll be bloody pissed off, and so on, but this will be the best thing that ever happened to you. And he was probably right in terms of what it meant for his Test career, which I think just speaks to the intensity of like Test cricket and stuff, that actually these guys, some guys just need a break. Actually, we saw that Alistair Cook, actually, he was burned out at 33 and retired. And maybe given England's, struggled really for a long time to find opening batters, would they be better off saying, Alistair, you can have a year off, but we want you to come back after that? And maybe that would have been a better way. But no, Smith, I think Smith in the Pantheon, I think he's probably quite clearly at this point, actually, Australia's second best batsman of all time. I think he's pretty well established in that. He's not going to get to number 1, even if I do a new edition in 10 years' time, though.
No, absolutely not. So, great stuff, Tim. Look, I've kept you for a long time, and I could have spoken to you for hours and hours, but I think what I would implore the listeners to do is go and buy the book. I on this podcast, when there's a Test match, the downloads go up. So I know a lot of the fans here love Test cricket. So, where can they get the book? Where can they keep up with all your work?
There we'll show it again. So the book, actually, it's available kind of worldwide. It's in good bookshops, as we say. So it's not a good bookshop if they don't have this book, but it's also available to order online, all the usual places. So it is available in Australia, as it is in England and India and so on. And there's I'm sure I can share a link in the show notes, and follow me on X or whatever. And I'll be trying to bait Aussies with my writing in the meantime.
Yeah, no, you didn't really bait me. Well, it's great to have you on. Hopefully we can meet in person next summer when you're in Australia for the Ashes. I was really pissed off, as you might have heard on the opener, about what happened at Lord's in 2023. And, I still have a lot of lingering animosity towards Stokes and McCullum in particular. I just because I hate their sanctimonious bullshit. They were like, oh, we're going to say what the spirit of cricket is. Like, get lost. Like, just play the game and win. Like, and what I didn't like was the fact that it was a diversion from the 2-0, the fact that they were 2-0. Like, so yeah, I've got to deal with that before the English team arrives next summer. Any advice?
Well, I suppose Australia, I think Australia are favourites for that series, so that would probably make it easier for you to deal with. England have won the Ashes once since 1987 down under, so it's bloody hard, and it actually for England
2010-11 though, Boxing Day was the worst day of my life. I'm not joking, Tim. My dad died in 2000, so it was even worse than that. So I go down there, first ever Boxing Day test, and go with the mate. It's going to be the best day of my life. And by stumps on day one, test is gone. Like, that never happens. Like, in your whole history of test cricket book, there wouldn't be many examples in Australia or England where by the end of day one team is just gone. And then I went back that night and to a friend's house, and he put on the first episode of Breaking Bad, which is a great show. But I was so depressed, I just couldn't watch it. And all the drugs and everything. I was just like, no. I need something like really light and fuzzy.
Yeah, well, England enjoy those days. They're not necessarily as common as England would like. But
you're saying pin my hopes on a drubbing. I had this argument with Andrew McGlashan. Do we want an England drubbing or do we want a close series? And he says, it'd be great if England can steal an early test like India did, and then it just keeps the series alive. Yeah,
I mean, I think it's true. You get a lot of English fans historically who've come out from Melbourne, Sydney, and it's been gone already, the urn. So it would be nice if things in one of the first couple, and then it keeps things boiling for longer.
And you talk about the Bairstow stuff. Well, you talked about the cultural differences between Australia at grade and club level. I think that really played out with Bairstow. Like, in Australian grade cricket, everybody's like, yeah, that's out. When you're playing down at Billericay's third 11 and there's some guy wanders out of his crease, you probably just like, oh, don't worry about it. The guy's 50. He's just here for a bit of a day out.
Well, just on that, there was a really interesting point in England, which at the time, there was a real north-south divide. So in North, where club cricket is much more competitive, even in Yorkshire, there was actually less sympathy for Bairstow because those sorts of dismissals happen much more often. And in the South, where you've had more kind of social cricket, a bit more along the lines of what you said, there was more like, this is a disgrace. We're going to be in the long room and abuse the Aussies. So there was a bit of a split in England, actually, where I guess in actually Yorkshire, ironically, obviously because Bairstow is Yorkshire, but there's probably been a bit more of an Australian attitude, if you like, in club cricket. So there was a bit of a weird north-south split in England in terms of how they viewed the Bairstow dismissal. Yeah, I had a great guy, Chris Stocks, on afterwards, and he said to me that, this was a chance after Sandpapergate for Australia to kind of, right that wrong, do something good. And I didn't like that wagging the finger of the English at the Aussies after that. Where do you sit on it? Last question. Where do you sit on what happened and the fallout? I always said it's fair enough. The spirit. We can't really. The spirit of cricket is a nebulous concept. If generally, if you play by the laws of the game, you stay with the nose and you can't go far out. So no, I thought it was actually fair enough dismissal. Well, Tim, I'll buy you a coffee. I'm not just saying that because of you either. No. I know you're not. And I'll buy you a coffee when you're in Sydney and maybe a bit more. Listeners, thanks for tuning in, Tim. You've been a fantastic guest. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you. I can't thank you enough. And again, congratulations. That is a masterpiece. I don't say that lightly, but I just absolutely love the book. It was a thrilling ride. So I thoroughly recommend everyone go out and find it. And we'll be back soon for another episode.